Joy McPhail's husband number. Well, I guess he's really just basically. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the regular meeting of council to order. Perhaps people could take their seats. Why do I feel like Rodney Dangerfield today? Having called the meeting to order, I'd ask for a procedural motion to proceed in camera. the Nanaimo First Nation. And our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. Tonight's regular meeting of council will be held in accordance with the Community Charter, Council Procedure Bylaw 2018 number 7272, and Ministerial Order number M192 governing open meetings. As the province is in phase 3 of the reopening plan, question period has been reinstated for those in attendance for agenda items only. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left. And if during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. And at the start of question period, I will call up those who've signed up to the podium to address council. And the first item on the agenda is the usual introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry, and I understand we have one.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. There's one late addition this evening, and it is for Agenda Item 12E, Short-Term Rental Bylaw Amendments, adding the delegation from Nathan Rotman.
Thank you very much, and I will advise now that Councillor Brown will be chairing the meeting at that point because I have a conflict. I have a close family member who has an Airbnb suite and will not be participating whatsoever in the debate. The next item is the motion for adoption of the agenda as amended. Moved Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Brown. All those in favour? Any opposed? Motion carries. A motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved Councillor Armstrong, seconded Councillor Martman. All those in favour? Any opposed? Motion carries. And the Mayor's report. I have a number of items. I gave a pretty stern lecture a couple of weeks back about voting in the election. So I think it's only appropriate tonight that I thank all the people who came out to vote in this community, in this electoral district, but even more importantly, thank all of those who put their names forward for election. Surprisingly for this area, we do not have a determination yet as to who will be our Member of Parliament, and everyone eagerly awaits the count. I will say, regardless, that I wish to express my thanks to Paul Manley, who has served as MP since the by-election here in May of 2019. And again, my thanks to all of the candidates who put their names forward, but also all of the people who took the time to work in the election for the various parties, thus participating in a real way in democracy and having their voices heard by ensuring that people whose ideas they support were heard, and that the rest of us had a choice to make on election day, unlike many parts of the world where there is no such choice available. I'm going to move to what may be seen as a sad note, and is a very sad note for many employees who may or may not be able to find employment, and that is the closure of the Tilray facility at Duke Point. That was announced the other week. However, I am happy to report and I am very hopeful that two relatively significant players are interested in the facility. As most people know, we have a shortage of industrial land in Nanaimo, and there is an opportunity there for a new employer who will hopefully be able to take up some of the slack that's been left, and our sympathies, of course, go to those employees who will not be in a position to be transferred, but will in fact have lost their jobs permanently with Tilray. I'm also pleased to re-announce and express Council's pleasure at the news of the Nanaimo Port Authority, Nanaimo First Nation, and Concora Capital Partners entering into agreements to provide the very long anticipated high-speed passenger service between Nanaimo and downtown Vancouver with a fast ferry. We are all extremely hopeful that this will in fact come to pass, and I don't wish to be cheeky, but I think the announcement has been made or remade or unannounced or withdrawn so many times that some of us have lost a certain amount of confidence, but I think we are on firm footing, if I may mix my metaphors when talking about a foot passenger service. The city is seeking feedback on options for Westwood Lake amenity improvements, and I would hope that everyone will take advantage of that. Westwood Lake, Mr. Harding is with us tonight, our General Manager of Parks and Recreation. I can safely say is being loved to death, and certainly the public has given us a lot of feedback in the last year and a half, in particular during COVID times. So please get involved at the survey. It's www.getinvolvednanaimo.ca/Westwood, and that closes on October 31st. Council has also formally now adopted, with some change, the Animal Responsibility Bylaw, and I am hopeful that people who express their views in this in great number, probably more so than in any other issue almost in the last few years, will take time to read the bylaw, to ask questions, and to understand that it is in fact a significant improvement as far as the management of our animals within the city are concerned, and I think will ensure better treatment of those creatures that we love and care for. I'm also pleased to mention that the BC Urban Mayors Caucus, of which I'm a member, this week saw the adoption of the report Ensuring Local Government Financial Resiliency, Today's Recovery and Tomorrow's New Economy, and the report makes 20 recommendations on reforming local government financing. And the urban mayors have picked 5 of those as being the most important for the province. I won't bother enumerate them, but the Urban Mayors Caucus, I think, is starting to have some impact on government policy, and that's a very positive thing. I'm also pleased to announce that Nanaimo City Council's resolutions a number of them were endorsed at UBCM. We had 3 resolutions submitted to be considered and voted on: the BC Circular Economy Strategy, province-wide strategy to manage construction and demolition waste, and right to repair legislation. The BC Circular Economy Strategy was endorsed on Wednesday, and resolutions C11 and C12 were similar to resolutions by other municipalities which were likewise endorsed. So ours weren't endorsed directly, but certainly we played a role. Most importantly, prior to and via Zoom, obviously, or other methods, I and many members of council met with numerous cabinet ministers and others during UBCM, and in particular, and I think in some order of priority, given the concerns in our community around housing and homelessness and the mental health and addictions and brain injury crisis that fills our streets with so much misery. We met in turn with the Attorney General and Minister responsible for housing, Minister Eby. We met also with Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, Murray Rankin, the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Sheila Malcolmson, and the Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General, Mike Farnworth, as well as the BC Assessment Authority, BC Housing, and BC Hydro. The UBCM gives us as council an opportunity to advance things that are important to the people of the city of Nanaimo. And I think it's fair to say, given some comments earlier tonight, that we were relatively successful, certainly in driving home to the province our concerns around housing, mental health, addictions, and brain injury. And I'm going to end on a really, really positive note. There has been some criticism around the improvements to Metro Drive, but there have been a lot of compliments. And I say with great pride and give credit to Mr. Sims and his team that the City of Nanaimo has won an award for its transportation engineering design standards and raised local intersections. The new Complete Streets Engineering Standards adopted by the Nanaimo City Council in 2020 prioritize safety and accessibility for all commuters by embracing traffic calming and multimodal transportation. We have won 3 awards for the new standards and the implementation. The Transportation Association of Canada 2020 Sustainable Transportation Award, the Institute of Transportation Engineers 2021 North American Complete Street Technical Achievement Award, and most recently, as I said, at the UBCM, the Union of BC Municipalities Community Excellence Award for Excellence in Sustainability. So, congratulations to the staff and previous councils and those who endorsed the work, as well as this council. It's something to be proud of. And I'm happy that we can rise and report on the Design Advisory Panel appointments. At the in-camera council meeting held on August 30th, 2021, council appointed Jill Yuzwa, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, and Angela Buick as at-large members on the Design Advisory Panel for a 3-year term. Councillor Brown was appointed as a council representative and Councillor Hemmons as alternate. And I think for those of you who've seen some of the new structures going up around town, the Design Advisory Panel is doing very good work for this city, and I want to extend publicly my thanks to them. We now have some presentations, and the first is the Tourism Nanaimo update. Mr. Harding, good evening and welcome, please.
Thank you, Worship. I'm pleased to introduce in a moment here Jen Houtley-Ferguson, Interim Manager of Tourism Nanaimo. Last time Jen spoke in front of council, we were in much different situations where quite a lot of travel restrictions, little to no travel was actually permitted. So today, tonight, Ms. Ferguson is going to update us on what's happening last summer where travel restrictions were open, people could travel a little bit more, caucus together in smaller numbers, and then even more so what Tourism Nanaimo is looking for in the next 4 to 6 months. I'll turn it over to Jen.
Thank you very much. Ms. Houtley-Ferguson, good evening and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks to Council for the opportunity to provide a bit of an update today. So I am very excited to say that as of July the 1st, we, like everywhere else in British Columbia, began welcoming visitors from across Canada, and fully vaccinated American citizens and permanent residents were able to arrive in British Columbia and other parts of Canada on August the 9th. And since that time, on September 7th, we are now welcoming fully vaccinated international travelers. An important message here is we know COVID numbers are rising and this situation continues to evolve across the country. Certainly our neighbors in Alberta are experiencing that right now. And we continue to highlight that know before you go and COVID safety messaging, including sharing information about the steps that our partners are taking. And I think many of them are extremely well prepared and responding very well in this situation. So it's just important to state that. I think it's important for residents to know that we take that seriously. Just to give a quick snapshot, when I was here last, of course, I was saying we're still largely, the tourism industry was shut down. And this is one of those quick snapshots. This one actually is from August the 30th, and it shows that year over year, so from the comparison between 2020 and 2021, we are up in most cases. You know, the number is extraordinary, 92 or 95 or 98%. However, when you make that comparative relative to 2019, most operators are still at about 50% of what they were doing in 2019. And so while the news is good in the short term, it is important that we fully understand that there are many operators that continue to have challenges. Many are still down 50%. And this is in large part to really, it's a shifting. The last time I was here, I shared with you the opportunity to shift domestic travel and encourage Canadians to travel at home, and in particular to encourage British Columbians to travel at home. But those individuals do not spend the same way that our international visitors do. International visitors often come for 3 to 6 weeks, and their spend is much greater. So while the news is, we're starting to see some resurgence here, and some of our operators are reporting a very strong summer, particularly in the accommodation sector, equally we're seeing challenges in terms of human resource capacity in restaurants and also in our accommodation sector. What we're hearing from some accommodation partners is actually they're having to not sell rooms because they aren't able to turn them over. So they can't be cleaned fast enough, and that's impacting their ability to sell their full inventory. So that continues to be a challenge. In addition, the island, while we were not impacted as significantly by wildfire or wildfire smoke this summer, there still was a perception of risk. I can share with you that we had advertising that was planned in the Ontario market to support the Air Canada flight, the direct flight between Nanaimo and Toronto. And the advertising partner that we were working with when we declared the state of emergency back in July refused to work with us, despite our best efforts to explain our proximity and kindly indicate where we are located relative to those that were really being seriously impacted in the interior. That was a surprise. So we continue to be impacted by that perception of risk relative to wildfire, and we did see cancellations even on the island as a result of that. People who are a little closer, our friends in Alberta and those, of course, in other parts of BC, more familiar with the territory, more familiar with our region, and therefore were more willing to travel here and didn't perceive that risk to be prohibitive. We also saw highway closures that impacted many parts of British Columbia, and again, the ability to move to and from different parts of the province impacted people's ability to come to Nanaimo. So that continued to be a challenge. We also are starting to see, as of about mid-August, when our COVID numbers started to shift, we've started to see even BC residents start to rethink their travel plans and staying a little closer to home. So that certainly follows our decisions in terms of advertising closer to home and continuing to share our COVID protocols. So our new website that we've got layers look and feel launched at the end of April, and it's been very well received thus far. We supported the launch to Edmonton, between Nanaimo and Edmonton on WestJet on June the 25th, and that included the delivery of Nanaimo bars to our colleagues in Edmonton, and they very kindly ensured that everybody who got on the aircraft received a well-wrapped Nanaimo package to bring with them. And we continue as we look ahead to fall. So this is actually an advertisement that's in the Nanaimo, or sorry, that's in the, it's Nanaimo, in the Edmonton airport, in the departure lounge. And we also have here, of course, our ambassadors that are now on the waterfront, or were until the September long weekend. They also were at Departure Bay Beach, and they were interacting with visitors, and of course residents who were welcoming visitors into our community. We also had strong print and social campaigns that ran throughout Alberta and, of course, different parts of British Columbia. And then as we look ahead to fall, we're continuing to work, of course, collaboratively with the Nanaimo Hospitality Association. We have TV, radio, and then we're doing some other fun things. The ad across the bottom is actually what will be on the SkyTrain come October. So if you're in Vancouver, you will see Nanaimo on the side of the SkyTrain. Our consumer e-blasts started again in August as we were starting to be able to welcome travelers from further afield. Visa campaigns, we're also working on our ale trail, and of course COVID-friendly images as we continue to have a mask mandate throughout the summer. Some of the other initiatives, we also have research underway and a new brand strategy. We're working in collaboration with some partners, including Vancouver Island University, on that, and those intercepts have already occurred. And then we will continue to have seasonal intercepts for the visitor experience survey in partnership with VIU through the winter season and into the spring. And that is it. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you very much. Questions from council? Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and your enthusiasm. At the very last bullet, I think in the last slide, it mentioned Tourism Tuesdays. I'm taking it is on hold for right now.
It is now on hold. It was something that we were very seriously considering actually for September. We actually shifted our brand strategy that all of you folks were included in. We moved it to a virtual platform so that we could include more individuals. So we're looking at a different way to engage with stakeholders.
Thank you.
Seeing no one else, I will simply say thank you to you. I think the lesson I learned from my grandmother a long time ago was that the best part of our lives is the times that challenge us. We don't necessarily remember the good times with as much pride and pleasure. And I must say, in your position right now, it's been a real challenge, so thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The next item is committee minutes. We have none, no consent items. We have no delegations unrelated to agenda items. The next report is the mural DX session, Maffeo Sutton Park Washroom Building. Mr. Harding, please.
Thank you, Worship. So this is something we don't do very often, but it's a formal process that we put in a number of years ago to make sure art was protected and made sure it was valued. But when a piece gets to a point where it needs to formally be deassessed, we come to council just as when we dedicate public art. So this is just a process. It's on the washroom building down at Maffeo. It's way past its lifespan. We want to be able to remove it, update the building until such a
Councillor Martman?
I just wanted to put the recommendation.
Certainly. Seconded Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next item is the Climate Action Reserve Fund Bylaw. Ms. Mercer, good evening.
Thank you, Your Worship. So So as we discussed at the July 21st Finance and Audit Committee meeting, the city has 2 statutory reserves that support energy and/or emission reduction projects and initiatives. So one is the Sustainability Reserve Fund, and this supports plans as well as projects and initiatives that meet established payback criteria and reduce the city's energy consumption or lower greenhouse gas emissions. And the funding for this reserve came from the Provincial Climate Action Revenue Incentive Program, or CAREP, and that is no longer valid anymore, so they've stopped that program. So this reserve has no funding going to it. And our second reserve was the Emissions Reduction Reserve Fund, and this supports projects, plans, and initiatives that reduce the city's CO2 emissions. Now, this reserve had a contribution that was calculated based on the GHGs that were calculated as part of...
Given the quality of the mic tonight, to just speak, no, don't bet, just speak directly into
Okay. Okay, you can hear me now?
it. I'm hoping it's the individuals, or is it a technical difficulty?
I think it's technical.
Okay.
I'm afraid it may be technology. Ms. Gurry?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So the mics seem to be dropping at that table, so perhaps Ms. Mercer might want to sit at this table if we give her a moment to move over here.
Thank you, Ms. Mercer.
Is that a mic drop?
No,
I think you might have to come all the way to this table, I'm sorry.
Keep going. Keep moving.
we think we're jinxed over here.
It's musical chairs tonight.
Thank
So
you.
do you want me to start again, or do you want me to just start with the emissions
No,
reduction?
that's fine. You can carry on. That's
Okay, so the Emission Reduction Reserve has a contribution that's based on the GHGs that are calculated as part of the CAREP reporting. And as that's no longer, we're no longer having that, to do that reporting, this would be additional work. However, since 2018, our GHGs have been reducing, so the amount going into this reserve has declined since then. So there's very little at this point going into that reserve. And that's basically due to the garden waste collection and credits for organic diversion that have increased substantially over the last few years. So as a result of these funding changes, staff are recommending that the 2 reserves be consolidate into a new reserve, and with a set annual funding allocation of $165,000. So the new Climate Action Reserve Fund Bylaw 2021, number 7330, has been created to provide a more sustainable funding source for project planning, and significantly reduces the amount of staff time that goes into budgeting for this reserve. And with this funding source, the change would be approximately a 0.1 property tax increase going forward. We have a bit of funding in the budget already that would have gone into the emission reserve, reduction reserve. So there's a slight increase in taxes to have like a one line in the budget of $165,000 going into that reserve. And then we can fund projects that, based on the criteria laid out in the bylaw. And so going forward, that's more sustainable for these type of projects. So that's what we're here for tonight.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bonner, and then Councillor Brown.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was wanted to speak the last item. Sorry.
Sorry, I just, next time yell if I'm trying to pull you through. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. I have a question through you to Ms. Mercer. The language in the report reflects section 4A and B, and I'm just looking for a little clarification on 4A. So 4B reads that the funds can be used to support the reduction of energy consumption for City of Nanaimo owned and operated facilities, so clearly corporate. I'm just wondering if 4A reduce the City of Nanaimo's greenhouse gas emissions and support the City of Nanaimo in becoming carbon neutral. Is that meant for community level expenditures?
Through your worship, yes. My understanding is that this is meant to cover both kinds of projects. So
Okay, perfect.
whether
Thank
it's
you.
internal or citywide.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Councillor Brown, do you want to make the motion then, please?
I will. If there's no more speakers, I would make the motion That the Climate Action Reserve Fund Bylaw 2021, number 7330, to establish a Climate Action Reserve Fund, pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Councillor Brown.
I would move that the Climate Action Reserve Fund Bylaw 2021, number 7330, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Councillor Brown.
And I would move that the Climate Action Reserve Fund Bylaw 2021, number 7330, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. The next is the 10-year property tax exemption bylaw for the Island Corridor Foundation. Ms. Mercer again, please.
Sorry, Your Worship, Council Gesselbrock, did you want to excuse yourself for this Island Corridor Foundation bylaw reading? You, I think, removed yourself when the discussion came up before.
Yes, please.
Okay, so if you wouldn't mind turning your camera off, and then we'll count you as not being here. Thank you.
Okay, we're good.
Very good. Ms. Mercer?
Okay, so the Island Corridor Foundation, or ICF, is a nonprofit society and a federally registered charity established for the purposes of owning and managing the rail corridor on Vancouver Island. So since 2007, the Island Corridor Foundation has received various forms of property tax exemptions from the City of Nanaimo, and this has included included a couple of properties on our annual permissive tax exemption bylaw. They had a 10-year property tax exemption bylaw, and that was from 2011 to 2020. And they also currently have a heritage bylaw exemption, and that's for their property at 321 Selby Street, which is the train station. So there's been a few over the years. So in 2010, the property tax exemption bylaw number 7100 was adopted by the council of the day, and it gave the Island Corridor Foundation a 10-year exemption on 43 of their properties. So at the time, it was thought that the 10-year exemption would be advantageous in renegotiating agreements such as utility crossings and trailways, which that has come to fruition in some part. And so bylaw 7100 expired in 2020. And as such, all properties that were on the bylaw became taxable in 2021. So the total amount of taxes owing on these properties for 2021 was just over $114,000. So the recommendation before council tonight is that we issue a cash grant for 2021 in the amount of $114,301.55, and to give the first three readings to the property tax exemption bylaw, Island Corridor Foundation 2021 number 7331, and that will provide a 10-year exemption for those 43 properties going forward for 10 years from 2022 to 2031. So the funding for the cash grant would be, we currently have a $5,000 budget for permissive tax exemption cash grants. So we would use that, and the remaining funding would come from surplus, and if surplus wasn't enough, we would fund it through the General Financial Stability Reserve. And so that's what's before council tonight.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mercer. Councillor Brown, are you?
I'm just ready.
You're ready? Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, my question is I'm just concerned about the 10-year exemption now that we've got the court case, which says they only have 2 years to move on stuff. So is it prudent to do a 10-year exemption at this time, now that there's a court decision that's been rendered?
Through your worship, we can cancel this at any point. So if something happened, then that we could rescind this bylaw. But we could make it for 2 years, depending on what's going to...
I was actually thinking 5, but
Yeah.
I'll wait to see if anybody else has concerns. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Worship. I don't have any concerns. We have property exemption bylaws for all the many other organizations, and if for whatever reason they no longer are on the property or own the property, then it just becomes null and void. The question I do have, though, is why do we have a specific bylaw for Island Corridor Foundation and everyone else is under our tax exemption bylaw?
And through your worship, to Councillor Bonner, so that was historically how we dealt with it. And we didn't have to add those to the annual one every year. It was just a practice that I'm continuing doing it that way. So we could have added them to the annual one, but that only is from year to year, where this one is for a set 10 years, and we don't have to look at it again unless something came up.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further questions, Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you. I would move the first recommendation.
I'm sorry,
Sorry.
Councillor Brown. You have to read out the bylaw.
Yes.
Oh, it's just a grant, though.
Here's your moment to start.
I can read it again, but the first one's just a grant. I would move that council approve a cash grant of $114,301.55 for 2021 property taxes to the Island Corridor Foundation for the properties that became taxable in 2021.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Brown.
I would move that property tax exemption bylaw, Island Corridor Foundation 2021, number 7331, to provide a 10-year permissive tax exemption 2022 to 2031 inclusive, pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Brown.
I would move that property tax exemption bylaw, Island Corridor Foundation 2021, number 7331, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Once more with feeling.
And I would move that property tax exemption bylaw, Island Corridor Foundation 2021, number 7331, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Gurry, do we know how to bring back Councillor Gesselbrock? Should we? It's not quite the raising of Lazarus, but it's a modern bit of technology.
There he is.
There we are. Welcome back, Councillor Gesselbrock. The next is item D, consideration of new permissive tax exemption applications. Ms. Mercer, once again, your night.
It is, you'll be happy this is my last one.
Mr. Lindsay will be getting jealous, I'm sure.
I know, yeah. So staff have received 7 permissive tax exemption applications before the June 30th submission deadline. And all of the applicants met the criteria as outlined in the grants policy and guidelines. So the applicants that were requesting to be placed on the permissive tax exemption bylaw are the Nanaimo Association for Community Living for their location at 3425 Uplands Road. Then we have the Woodgrove Senior Citizens Housing Society at 1145 Seafield Crescent, and the High An Buddhist Society at 587 7th Street. And we have 3 properties for the Nanaimo Affordable Housing Society, one at 858 Georgia Street, one at 77 Mill Street, and one at 10 Buttertubs Drive. And the last one is the Trinity United Church for their location at 6011 Dumont Road. So council is being asked to either approve or deny the applications. And so the next steps for this are any approved applications will be added to our annual permissive tax exemption bylaw, and that will be presented to council for first 3 readings on October 4th with adoption on October 18th. And the annual bylaw has to be approved before the legislative deadline of October 31st. So next step is we'll bring back whatever you approve tonight, we'll bring back on the 4th for inclusion in that bylaw.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown, did you wish to speak to this? I see you have a question from Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Number 7, the Trinity United Church. Typically in the past, I think the province requires us to exempt the footprint of the building. This is for the property itself, and I know that we've done this in the past as well. Do they actually have a church there yet, or is it just the property?
I think they're in the process of getting that established as a church. So currently, my understanding is that they would have that ready by the 2022 tax year.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. I will move 1 to 7.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. As I indicated earlier, I have a conflict in this matter, and so I will absent myself accordingly. And just hope you'll call me back for the balance of the meeting afterwards, though.
I've never used this thing.
Nothing to it.
Okay, everyone, you'll have to forgive me. I've never used this thing. So, short-term rental bylaw amendments to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Council. Mr. Holm is with us this evening, and he will introduce the remaining items on your agenda, including this next item, as you mentioned, on short-term rentals. And I'd also mention that Dave Stewart is with us this afternoon, or this evening, who's been the project lead on this initiative. And between Mr. Holm and Mr. Stewart, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer any questions from Council.
Mr.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. And as Mr. Lindsay mentioned, Mr. Stewart's here to answer questions in detail about some of the information provided in the report, but I'll give a brief overview. So this project actually comes out of a recommendation in the Nanaimo Affordable Housing Strategy, and that's to review and develop regulations to provide for short-term vacation rental accommodation. Currently, the city does not have regulations specific to short-term rental accommodation other than bed and breakfasts. In the fall of 2020, the Governance and Priorities Committee received a presentation information from staff with recommendations regarding regulating short-term rental accommodation within the city. Council provided direction at that point with regard to some bylaw amendments that we prepared and presented tonight for Council's consideration. In addition, Council at that time in the fall of 2020 directed staff to undertake additional stakeholder consultation. That was undertaken through 2021 in the spring. An STR short-term rental survey was done through the Reimagine platform, and we received 484 responses. The survey results are summarized in the report and are included as attachment A. I won't go into them in any detail, but again, Mr. Stewart's here to speak to those if Council has any questions as well. Questions about short-term rental accommodations were put forward in a renter and landlord survey, a separate survey specific to renters and landlords that asked a couple of questions about short-term rental accommodation, and we received 243 responses specific to those questions that were put forward to renters and landlords in a separate survey. Those are also included. A summary there is included as attachment B. As well, staff undertook discussions with stakeholder groups, 21 different phone calls, meetings, including a number of key stakeholders in the community: Nanaimo Hospitality Association, Vancouver Island University, Nanaimo Regional General Hospital, and Nanaimo Family Life Association, among some of them. Attachment C in the report includes a summary of the stakeholder feedback received through those dialogues. The draft amendments that are presented, again, allow for short-term vacation rentals with some restrictions and are consistent with the direction provided by Council in the fall of 2020. So if approved as presented, the regulations would permit short-term rentals accommodations within residential, commercial, and downtown and corridor zones where the operator is a permanent resident of the dwelling unit or suite. They would apply the current limits, existing limits that currently apply to the number of guest rooms and guests that are permitted within bed and breakfasts, which are currently allowed within the city's regulations. So the same limits would apply to other forms of short-term rental accommodation. And as well, it would continue to allow short-term rental guest rooms within secondary suites, provided that the total number of long and short-term rental rooms doesn't exceed 2 per dwelling unit in the suite, house or suite, separate suite. So as well, tonight, as well as that's just a highlight of the regulations that are outlined in the report in more detail. We're also looking for direction from council to confirm that council intends that business licensing be required for both short-term rental accommodations and for bed and breakfasts. Currently, business licensing is not required for bed and breakfast, but recommended to business licensing to apply to short-term rental accommodations. And as we've prepared, the report would also apply to bed and breakfasts. As well, we're looking for direction to prepare an explanatory guide for operators and a declaration for form for short-term rental accommodation operators as well. That provides information to staff to allow residents to address complaints and allow operators to be reached in the event of complaints. The recommendations that are provided tonight are consistent with the intent of the project that was set out at the outset, which was to ensure that we provided for short-term rental accommodations that didn't impact the long-term rental housing supply in the city in a negative way, and also ensured that as short-term rental accommodation operators are good neighbors, and to ensure that there's equity among short-term rental providers, including bed and breakfast operators, as well as other forms of accommodation, more traditional hotels and motels. So to assure equity amongst those groups. And the recommendations that are provided are consistent with direction provided by council and achieve those objectives. And I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thanks, Mr. Holm. We do have one delegation, but we can take questions here. Councillor Armstrong?
Thank you. Mine goes to, and I've had this before, my concern is around that no more than 2 guest rooms and 4 guests, including the suites. Because what about children? You know, sometimes a family has, you know, there's 2 adults and 3 children. So the way this reads now, even though I know that the reply backs of children wouldn't be counted, but the way it reads, unless we have a definition of a guest, that family would be in contravention of our bylaw. So if I could have clarification around that, please.
Sure, thank you. Thank you through your worship. The interpretation of the way we currently apply the bed and breakfast regulations, guests, the number of guests limit the number of adults, not children.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Chair, the delegation does not appear to be on Zoom. I believe there might have been some confusion on the time, and he's not available right now.
Okay, Ms. Gary, so just for clarity, we proceed then?
No, I would just skip by it. He wasn't here, so we won't receive him. We'll just proceed with the recommendation.
Mr. Holm?
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. I might just add to, if the delegation is unable to speak tonight, because this includes amendments to the city zoning bylaw, it will proceed to public hearing if council were to approve it first and second readings of the bylaw tonight. So there would be another opportunity for stakeholders to speak to the proposed amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Holm. Councillor Bonner.
I'm fine with the regulations as we have, the bylaw as it sits. I do have a problem, though, with the enforcement, and I spoke to this when we first started this process. And if I remember correctly, I think the very first meeting I attended as an elected official was one of these short-term rental things. It was quite some time ago that we started this, I think, process. But my concern here is that if we carry on with a compliant-based where people have to complain about something, we're basically turning neighborhoods into their own little mini police, right, where they have to go around and basically rat out their neighbor. And the problem here is this is a very simple thing that we could do electronically in terms of monitoring all the short-term rentals in Nanaimo. And you can buy a license for, I think, $30 or $40 a month, and it will give you all the information on every single Airbnb that's listed on any of the more popular sites. And then you can just download it as an Excel spreadsheet, compare it to whatever business license we have, and whoever's not on the list is not compliant. And so I'm wondering why we don't seem to have that as an option here in terms of enforcement, but the only option is a $20,000 or $60,000 annual bill, which to me doesn't really make sense, because I know that you can get it for a lot cheaper. But here's the other problem. If we start getting complaints, then is it cheaper to have a bylaw officer go out and do an investigation to see whether or not there is an Airbnb there, and then to come back and do all the other sort of work? Or is it cheaper to just rent monthly a subscription to one of these sites and then just send them a letter? Like we're told it's cheaper, but I'm not sure it is. I just think it's a lot more work on bylaw officers that have to randomly go out every time there's a complaint, as opposed to us just sending them all letters and telling them to be compliant.
So not a question on the bylaws, but on enforcement, Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, I'm into that. Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, in terms of the compliance, we did include in the presentation last fall some information on host compliance, which is one of those online monitoring programs that Councillor Bonner is referring to. The minimum cost for that Canadian is $31.68 for that particular service. There are other services available at similar costs. Host compliance is just the one that seems to be the largest player in British Columbia right now, so that's why we included that information. And then other fees. So that's just for their address monitoring, which is standard with any package. Additional fees can get up to $70, and that's per short-term rental in Nanaimo. So that's where that's how you get to that fee that's quoted in the other report, between the $20,000 to $60,000. It depends on the package you receive and the number of short-term rentals that they're monitoring.
See, I'm going
to go to Mr. Lindsay here, and then.
Sure.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to Mr. Stewart's response, because I think a lot of it is about why not now and why not start with this. And part of it is, because we did have that discussion about, do we want to start with this enforcement? Part of it is looking at the reality that although we're just taking steps to add regulations around short-term rental, we know there's many operating within the community now. And given the volumes, we still have relatively few complaints that come in. So part of it is, we think, like any bylaw, there's a monitoring period where we look at how it's been implementing, what do we see, and then come back if are there changes to the bylaw that are needed, and do we need to take additional steps on enforcement. And Mr. Stewart's spoken to the one tool that's out there, but I suspect it's like anything, there's probably a range of service that you pay for, and it can vary quite a bit in terms of cost. But we thought, starting out now, not adding that additional layer, but it's always an option for council to add back in later.
Councillor Armstrong.
Just to follow up on that, I guess my question would be, would there be union concerns around that? Like, because would we have to, would the union not have to be involved in that? Because we would also have to have additional staff, I would imagine, to do that. I don't know if anybody can answer that, or, because I believe there would be union.
It's certainly an issue anytime we look at contracting, and I'm not going to speak for Mr. Horn, who would probably speak better to this topic, but I'd say it's one of the considerations we'd look at. From my understanding, is the majority of the work that these providers offer is simply identifying potential infractions, and communicating that ultimately to the operator and to the city. That's their primary function. So,
but it would still have to go before the union, correct? Before we could do that, because it's actually taking a job away from a city employee, or creating a new job for city employee.
I don't think the answer is black and white through the chair to Councillor Armstrong, because I think it's something we'd have to look at. I think, but part of the response is we do not have people that actively or proactively go out and look for these now. So it would be an additional level of service beyond something that we're doing.
Thank you.
So council, we have 6 recommendations. The first 4 must be taken separately.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through you, Councillor Hemmans is the next acting mayor, so perhaps she would be willing to read out the bylaw.
Nope.
Thank you. I would like to move that zoning amendment bylaw 2021 number 4500.186 to regulate short-term rentals pass first reading.
Seconded by Councillor Martman. Any discussion? See none, call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries.
I will move that zoning amendment bylaw 2021 number 4500.186 pass second reading.
Seconded by Councillor Martman. Any discussion? See none, call the question. Any opposed? See none opposed, motion carries.
I would move that off-street parking regulations amendment bylaw 2021 number 7266.01 to require one parking space for a short-term rental use pass first reading.
Moved or seconded by Councillor Martman. Any discussion? Councillor Armstrong.
Sorry, I just had to say, I find it ironic that we're requiring parking there, yet we don't for apartment buildings to the same degree. Thank you.
Any further discussion, council? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? See none opposed, motion carries.
I would move that off-street parking regulations amendment bylaw 2021 number 7266.01 pass second reading.
Seconded by Councillor Martman. Any discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? See none, motion carries.
Thank you. I would move that council confirm a business license is required for all short-term rentals, including bed and breakfasts in Nanaimo, and direct staff to prepare an explanatory guide and operator declaration form for Nanaimo residents interested in operating a short-term rental, including a bed and breakfast.
Seconded by Councillor Martman. Any discussion, council? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motions carry.
The next item is F, Development Variance Permit Application Number DVP 424-147 Swanson Road, and Mr. Lindsay.
Your Worship, thanks on the remaining items, since Mr. Holmes got all dressed up and joined us tonight. I'm going to turn it over to him and let him introduce the remaining items on the agenda.
Very, very good. So the Oscar goes to Mr. Holmes tonight.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a development variance permit to increase the maximum permitted floor area for accessory buildings at 147 Swanson Road. The property is zoned AR2 and it currently contains 2 single residential dwellings and 4 accessory buildings. It's in an area of large agricultural rural properties, similar to the subject property in size and use. Many with single residential dwellings as permitted in the zoning bylaw. Accessory buildings are currently limited in the zoning bylaw to 13% of a lot size, the parcel size, up to a maximum of 90 square meters, whichever is less. In this case, 90 square meters is the lesser. The applicant is requesting to vary the permitted total maximum accessory building gross floor area to 563.4 square meters, which is a proposed variance of 473.4 square meters. This variance would allow for 5.9% of the parcel to be constructed as accessory building floor area. So it's still well below the 13%, but greater than the 90 square meters, which is permitted by the zoning bylaw. Statutory notification has taken place prior to council's consideration of this variance, and it's my understanding that the applicant is in attendance, has formed a delegation to speak to the matter as well. So I'm happy to take any questions, but I understand the applicant is here as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I call on the delegation, any questions for Mr. Holm? Blair and Deborah Uroki? Is that correct? Or Uroki? Or Urochi? Please. Welcome. I'm sure someone's explained to you. You have 5 minutes. And I will tell you when you're at 4 minutes, and so you'll have a minute left to speak. And welcome. If you could just state your name for the record and your address, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. My name is Blair Uroki, and I'm here with my wife, Deborah, and we are the current owners of 147 Swanson. Relatively new owners. We've just purchased this property in December. All of this, how am I trying to say here? We've inherited all these problems, with this property since we purchased it. When we purchased the property, we had our lawyers run a title search, and the search was clean at the time. So, of course, since then, the city has contacted us, and now it is ours to deal with. And we're hoping that you will allow us to keep our property as is. And we also have a tenant in the mobile home in question who has been there the entire time the mobile home has been there, and she would like to stay there as well, given the difficult rental. Sorry, I don't public speak well and often. Anyways.
It's no bar to getting to elected office in this country, so don't feel bad about it at all.
Anyways, I was going to get up here and read my rationale letter that we submitted with our original development variance permit application. However, since then, we've been given this staff report, and I understand that you guys have seen that, and most of the information that I was going to read is in there, and I don't want to waste your time. So with that, I think, and I would like to thank you gentlemen for preparing that. It's exactly what we wanted to state in this. And again, I'm just hoping that we can keep our property as is, and we're prepared to do what we need to do to make it acceptable, I suppose. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them if I can.
Thank you very much, Mr. Uroki. You're very short. You're less than 2 minutes. Are there any questions for the delegation? Seeing none, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to move the staff recommendation.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. I did note that I didn't ask if anyone else wished to speak, I don't think, but I don't see anyone here. I think we're safe to say.
Your Worship, there is actually someone in the
pardon
audience
me,
that does
sorry.
wish to speak. And we can thank the delegation, and he can be excused.
Thank you, Mr. Uroki. Sorry. If the delegation wants to come down. And if you
my name is.
Take your mask off and
Oh,
so
yeah.
we can hear you, and introduce yourself and state your name and address, please.
Yeah, so thanks for hearing me this evening. So I'm the immediate neighbor to Mr. Uroki. Actually, I didn't know his last name, Blair, so we met a couple times. My name is Luc Lachance. And we've been there for about 9 years. And we've seen these big buildings there since we arrived. And we've asked ourselves, why is that there, right? And so I also want them to keep what they have there. I think it doesn't make sense to remove them, but I'm more here to raise the issues where how do we see the development in the city? Is it do we see it done in an organized fashion? Or we see it, you go ahead and ask for forgiveness afterwards. So we've contacted the city probably 5 years ago when actually the main house was moved into that property. There was a driveway that was built to bring the house, and we were told by the city that the third house would be, removed. And so I've asked, when was that? And I was told it's none of my business. So it was an interesting thing, because I, figured, it's not a really acceptable response. So I guess my point is, are we looking or waiting for the situation to come up and then expecting, that the exceptions will be approved, or the variance will be approved as easily as that? Because I'll go ahead and build things. I'll make money out of renting apartments and whatever, and asking forgiveness afterwards. So all I'm looking for, I guess, is a balance in the approach, and maybe clarity in what we can do with those properties. And if we can, make affordable housing, let's say build smaller houses, rent them, exceed the number of properties that are authorized based on the zoning, then I'd like to know that, because I will do it. I have kids, and I think about them and think about what they'll end up with in the end. So, I guess it's not going in anywhere concrete per se, but I just want to be heard, and you take note of what I guess I'm raising as issues. I also submitted a short comment when I was informed of this application for variance. I didn't hear it mentioned here, so I've asked specifically for the report from staff making recommendations before the decision would be brought forward to the council. I haven't received anything. And as the immediate neighbor, I would have expected a phone call at least as a minimum, because I was raising things like, don't dismantle those things. Just make sure that the systems are built properly to prevent these situations from happening before, or before they get to the variance situation. Clarify what is authorized in the zoning. Consider allowing for like tiny house, for example, just say like smaller houses on foundation, or not necessarily on wheels, but make things viable, so these owners of those bigger properties can make the most out of these properties and not turn them into like warehouses or industrial facilities. Because it really, what we see around our place, is that trend, right? Because we're getting more closer to industrial facilities and housing. And I'm not sure where we're going. We're very close from the city there. Yes, it's rural.
You have a minute left, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I walk to the grocery store regularly. It takes 10 minutes. It's in the city. So it's not that rural. It's not Arrington. It's close to the city. It could be available to people who need affordable housing. And I think this needs to change, like in terms of what's authorized to develop on those properties.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the delegation? Mr. Lindsay, Mr. Holm, anything you can add that might assist?
Your Worship, maybe just a couple of comments. I think the first is just on the comment around enforcement and compliance with bylaws, because I think if somebody watched council regularly, you'd see that we're often before council at public hearings where we've found illegal construction, and we're recommending sometimes notices on title or even removal of whatever the item might be. So we look at each situation independently, and we'll come up with different recommendations. So I certainly don't want to leave the impression that you do whatever you want and then you come through this process and you get approved at the end, because this might be the one out of the 100 cases where that would work. The second part is, and I think there's a thread in there about affordable housing and maybe completely separate from this application, but I would acknowledge that there has been changes to the bylaws made over the last handful of years, including by this council, that has allowed for more what we've called detached secondary suites. So secondary suites outright in the city, but more locations in the city where you can build detached secondary suites. So some of those opportunities might be in the very neighborhood that you're talking about. And I would just encourage the speaker, we have staff available in the service center. I'd be happy to talk to you about that and confirm your zoning and tell you exactly what's permitted on the property.
Can I reply to this, or can I reply to this, or yes? Thanks. So the idea, thanks for the answer or that information. I think it's related to affordable housing, and I think this property beside, 147 Swanson, has got the main house, has another house, full size, and then the mobile unit that you heard about. So that mobile unit, I don't think is supposed to be there, based on the zoning. So if that's not the case, then I'd like to
Point of order.
understand what that zoning allows, because
Council.
we're holding up on a number of projects from our.
So, Your Worship?
If you could just wait a moment, please, Councillor Brown. Sorry.
That's point of order. We're here talking about a variance, not our affordable housing strategy or allowance. This is essentially a variance for floor area, or building coverage.
The development permit application, sir, relates to increasing the maximum permitted gross floor area for necessary accessory buildings. I think I can say to you, to allay your concerns, that pretty rare that we have a development permit application like this in these circumstances coming before the city. This is very much an exception, not the rule. And numerous titles in this community have notations on title where people have proceeded, for instance, without a building permit and then refused to take down the dwelling or improvement or change in question. So I hope that gives you some comfort. I appreciate your comments on this. Are there any other questions for the delegation? Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question to staff. With this specific situation, is there any recollection of the variance? I know that the delegate mentioned that a house was permitted to be transported onto the property, and that in that another house is supposed to be removed. Was there like any documentation of that transaction, and is that something that we follow up on?
Your Worship, I think the best I could offer is for staff to follow up with the speaker. I suspect what's happening here is the zoning bylaw has always historically allowed for 2 homes on acreage properties of this size. And that may very well be the case here. I'm somewhat, I don't have the information in front of me, so I'm somewhat going from memory. It allows 2 homes on the property. And as I had mentioned, in the last few years, councils amended the bylaws to allow for detached secondary suites. So the mobile that might have been there originally may now qualify as one of the detached suites on the property, and therefore all of the units are legal. So as it was not identified by staff as a variance, my assumption is that I'm correct in that interpretation, and the only variance we're seeking is simply for the floor area, not for the unit size. So there's no requirements for units to be removed.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe, Ms. Gurry, we had a seconder?
Yes, Your Worship. I believe the motion was made and on the floor before the speaker. Perhaps we just want to make double sure there's no one else wishing to speak before you vote. Just last.
Thank you. I was going to consider that. Any discussion, Council? Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So we have a development variance permit in front of us for accessory buildings that already exist that the neighbors have largely said we support. We have an immediate neighbor expressing some concern about that process, because then if other people build buildings and he's suggesting there's a system that if I just build something and ask forgiveness, then I'm likely to receive it. I'm wondering if staff can comment on that.
Your Worship, I think I was trying to say earlier that this is not, it doesn't set a precedent. Each case is looked at under its own, and we often bring before the council situations where some constructions occurred illegally, and we recommend notices on title and or possibly remedial action orders for removal. So it depends on the individual case. In this case, we think there's a rationale for supporting the variance, but it's not a universal truth that if you build something, we'll legalize it later. No, furthest thing from the truth.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Arms, thank you. All those in favor? Any contrary? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is development permit application number DP 1200-155 Fry Street. Mr. Holm, or please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, this is a development permit application for a property that council will likely be familiar with. It was the subject of a rezoning application recently, and I'm trying to remember, can't recall the date on that, but recently approved, rezoning approval August 30th, so quite recent that the zoning amendment was approved. Rezoned to Core 2, Corridor 2 zone, and it's a property within the South End neighborhood in close proximity to the downtown urban node. It's actually the continuation of Robbins Gardens, which is an existing development adjacent to the proposed development site here. The proposal is a 5-story mixed-use building, 55 dwelling units, as well as one commercial retail unit, 161 square meters. It's consisting of proposals consisting of 37 one-bedroom and 18 two-bedroom units. And if you could bring up, please, attachment F, that'll give an indication of the style of the building renderings there. Will give an indication of the style of the proposed development. It's quite consistent with the earlier phase 1 of the development on the adjacent parcel, and it contains it's sort of a Victorian architectural style, quite unique, and it contains elements such as a prominent mansard roof. It's quite a bold looking building, and again is complementary to the earlier phase. The proposal was reviewed by the Design Advisory Panel with recommendations to approve the development with some recommended changes which have been incorporated into the proposal. Yeah, if you could bring up attachment F, you can see the rendering, that would be helpful. Thank you. The proposal also includes variance as a minor height variance from 18 meters to 18.87 meters. And also an increase in the percentage of small cars permitted on the site from 40% maximum to 52%. There we go. That gives there's the building elevation. There's the renderings that I was mentioning. So quite a bold-looking, strong building form there. Staff support the proposed variances. That the development proposal is consistent with the applicable design guidelines, and as I mentioned earlier, is following through on a rezoning that was completed very recently for the property. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holm. Any questions for Mr. Holm? Seeing none, Councillor Brown moving the motion. Seconded Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is development permit application number DP 1215-1205 Ocean Pearl Terrace. Mr. Holm.
Thank you, Your Worship. This application is actually a development permit renewal. The existing development permit on the property expired in March of this year. This is largely consistent with the previously approved development permit, and maybe just trying to see if you could bring up attachment E, that would be helpful, just to demonstrate what the project looks like. The proposal's within the it's within the Rock City Road area. It's on Ocean Pearl Terrace. As was referenced earlier, Ellen's Architecture is the applicant on behalf of Domas Construction and Land Development Corporation. This proposal is for 30 residential units. It's in a 25-unit apartment building, and then as well a 5-plex, a 5-unit separate building. They're both constructed to be designed to be built into the slope, and they're appearing as 2 stories with individual level entries from the first floor. And then they have a 3-story southern elevation that works with the slope of the land. The 5-plex is proposed to include a minor height variance as well as the of 1.05 meters. The proposed 25-unit building includes a 2.2 meter height variance request as well. Front yard setback variances are proposed for the 5-plex and the bike storage building. The proposal and requested variances result in a development that's consistent with the city's design guidelines that apply to the project, and staff support the project and the proposed variances. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holm. Any questions? Seeing none, Councillor Brown, you're making the motion. Seconded, Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. The next is development permit application number DP 127-30 and 32 Lauren Place. Mr. Holm.
Thank you again, Your Worship. And another property that and project that Council will be familiar with was the subject of a rezoning application approved by Council in March of this year. Yeah, it kind of highlights a theme that we're seeing projects coming through rezoning, flowing fairly quickly into development permit. The demand is there. We're seeing strong construction activity, and that's quite exciting to see. In this case, the proposal by Satgir Developments is for an addition of 4 townhouse units to the property 30 and 32 Lauren Place. This will result in 6 units overall. There's an existing duplex on the property, so there'd be an addition of 4 units in sort of a townhouse form. So 6 rental units is what's proposed for the property. It's adjacent to Beaufort Park, and maybe if you could bring up in this case attachment F, which shows the landscape plan and details as proposed. It's definitely the project's taking advantage of proximity to Beaufort Park. The new units have patios that will face back onto Beaufort Park, which is going to be quite a nice space for the residents, the tenants in this case. It's a contemporary building form, and they're 1.5-story building with a low slope shed roof, kind of complementary to the existing buildings on the site. The existing buildings will be updated, obviously, to reflect the design. There we go. Thank you very much. The design of the new 4 units that are being added to the site. So quite efficient use of the site and a nice setting backing onto the park. The design panel supported the application with some recommended changes that have been incorporated into the design. And there are variances requested here, variances to rear yard setback as well as side yard setback, and very minor building height variance requests as well. The proposed development does address the city design guidelines, and staff support the proposed variances as well, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Holm? Seeing none, Councillor Brown moves the motion, seconded by Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next is development permit application number DP 1227-20 Barsby Avenue. Mr. Holm.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is actually an amendment to an existing development permit application. The development permit application previously, DP 1073, was approved by Council in July of 2018. And it was to permit the construction of a 6-story multifamily residential building consisting of 90 units, which, if you've been down Barsby Street recently, Barsby Avenue, it's quite a nice building, quite a nice addition to housing stock in the area. Through the course of construction, a terraced retaining wall was installed, constructed to the northeast side of the building. It's outside of the riparian area that was identified through previous approved development, but it's the retaining wall that was installed is over height relative to the allowances under the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw allows a 3-meter maximum wall height, whereas the wall that was constructed is 3.85 meters, so slightly over height. The proposal as I mentioned, is outside of the riparian setback area, although there are recommendations for additional planting density that was provided, a recommendation provided by a qualified environmental professional to ensure that there are no negative impacts to riparian area based on the changes that include the proposed wall, or sorry, the constructed wall. Staff support the proposed variance, and it is largely consistent with the previously approved development permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holm. Seeing no questions, Councillor Brown moves the motion, seconded Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any contrary? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you. We're on to bylaws. The Fire Protection and Life Safety Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 7108.03. Councillor Brown.
Very long list of bylaws tonight. I'd move that the Fire Protection and Life Safety Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 7108.03, to give delegated authority to the fire chief to enter into first responder training agreements with other local governments, be adopted.
Seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any contrary? Motion carries. Thank you. The next is Fees and Charges Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 7041.04.
I would move that the Fees and Charges Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 7041.04, to incorporate the fees associated with the Fire Protection and Life Safety Regulation Bylaw, be adopted.
Seconded Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. The next is Management Terms and Conditions of Employment Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 7273.02.
A mundane bylaw reading for a long overdue item. Move that the Management Terms and Conditions of Employment Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 7273.02, to amend the provisions of the Management Terms and Conditions of Employment Bylaw 2019, number 7273, to include the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, be adopted.
Seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. The next is D, Housing Agreement Bylaw 2021, number 7236. Councillor Brown.
I would move that Housing Agreement Bylaw 2021, number 7326, to authorize a housing agreement to secure affordable housing at 6010 Hammond Bay Road, be adopted.
Seconded Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The next is Animal Responsibility Bylaw 2021, number 7316. Councillor Brown.
I would move that Animal Responsibility Bylaw 2021, number 7316, to include provisions for animal welfare, control, licensing, duties of animal owners, penalties, and enforcement, be adopted.
Seconded Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. The next is F, Fees and Charges Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 7041.02.
Thank you. I would move that Fees and Charges Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 7041.02, to add animal control fees, be adopted.
Seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. G, Bylaw Notice Enforcement Bylaw Amendment to amend the Parks and Recreation and Culture fines and add fines and associated with the Animal Responsibility Bylaw.
Thank you, Worship. Before Councillor Brown reads out these bylaws, if there's any questions, Ms. Robertson or Mr. LaBerge are here to answer them, but these readings need to be given only if the Animal Responsibility Bylaw was adopted. That's why they're in this place of the agenda, so they are here to answer any questions you may have. If not, you could proceed.
If we have no questions for Ms. Robertson, who's waited patiently for her starring role tonight, Councillor Brown.
I would move that Bylaw Notice Enforcement Amendment Bylaw 2021, number 7159.12, to amend the fine schedule for the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Bylaw
and add a fine schedule for the animal responsibility bylaw. Pass third reading.
Seconded Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries. Councillor Brown.
I would move that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2021 number 7159.12 pass second reading.
Seconded Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Any contrary? Any discussion, by the way? Seeing none, all those in favor? None contrary? Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Brown.
And I would move that bylaw notice enforcement amendment bylaw 2021 number 7159.12 pass third reading.
Seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Any contrary? Seeing none, motion carries. Next is Parks, Recreation and Culture Regulation Bylaw 7073.08. Councillor Brown.
I would move that Parks, Recreation and Culture Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2021 number 7073.08 to remove sections that will be administered under the Animal Responsibility Bylaw and replace the violation and penalty section. Pass first reading.
Seconded Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Any contrary? None. Motion carries.
I would move that Parks, Recreation and Culture Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2021 number 7073.08 pass second reading.
Seconded Councillor Hemmens. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries. None, and any opposed, I should ask in fairness. Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you.
I would move that Parks, Recreation and Culture Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2021 number 7073.08 pass third reading.
Seconded Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Earned your keep tonight. No notices of motion. Other business, Councillor Brown, motion re-support of housing sites.
Thanks. That's open for a little break, but I'll move that staff identified two sites that could. I'm going to read that again. Sorry, I added one word. That staff identified two sites that could support supportive housing outside of Nanaimo's downtown and south end neighborhoods, and return to council for further direction.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Hemmens.
The additional word there was neighborhoods, just to clarify that I'm speaking to the south end neighborhood in Nanaimo, which everybody knows. This isn't a motion I particularly wanted to bring forward, but it's one that I feel that I must with the final year of our term. As council is all aware, we've signed an MOU and have different agreements to gratefully receive supportive and affordable housing in our city, even though ideally we wouldn't want to get that because the problem would be going the other way. But that's not the trajectory that we're on. So the pith of this motion is essentially comes down to two things: to make good on commitments to the residents of the OCQ, the south end, the downtown, that have consistently over the years taken their fair share of the burden of some of these social challenges, and in particular supportive housing and some of the ancillary uses that do emerge around supportive housing. It is a reality. They have impact. And to move us away from, I think sometimes we find ourselves in reactive situations because this problem is so huge, and provincial housing initiatives, very flush right now, or significant in comparison to what it has been in the past decade or so, does seem to come all at once, and there's a certain urgency there, and as the provincial government seeks to fill units, unfortunately, I think that can lead to some bad planning processes and some poor engagement processes with the community. And well, I have nothing but sympathy for the job that BC Housing has to do and are tasked to do. I'd argue that they're heavily under-resourced. Engagement tends to happen after the property is already purchased and the building has essentially been designed. I can understand how that comes to be, but I think as a problem emerges, that it starts to pit the community that more or less realizes there is an issue that needs to be addressed, but has genuine concerns around the impacts to their neighborhood, how it's going to be handled, and it is a scary thing, and they want assurances. So I believe if we are to shift from a little bit of reactive and hopefully get to as proactive as we can possibly be around these challenges, we do need to show up with some land that is more thoughtfully purchased and has the luxury of time to be a little bit more strategic than some of the sites that have emerged. So essentially what this motion would do would be ask staff to look for 2 sites outside of the neighborhoods identified, to sort of realize the informal policy that many citizens of Nanaimo believe we have, and that is that we have a distributed model when it comes to siting supportive housing throughout the community. This is not to say that we purchase them. It's to say, I know staff have done this exercise probably before through different initiatives to see if there are some sites out there that would make sense to realize that distributed need, and of course come back to council with what those sites might be and potential funding options. I will note that we do have almost $3 million unallocated in the Housing Legacy Reserve, which is put aside for items like this and other initiatives of the sort. There is some funds coming out there that council is aware of, but they are minor, and the fund is growing. And I would say, while the province has been very generous to date with not just Nanaimo, but across the province purchasing properties themselves, which is a little different from past models, I believe this would help give us some leverage to our existing MOU and some future agreements that I hope that we are able to see and realize more of in Nanaimo and get a better fair share of provincial funding to combat this challenge. But even with some of our existing projects, we have shown up with land, and that is useful, especially when I think we're talking about the amount of housing, affordable and supportive, that we need in our community. So I'm hopeful that council will support this tonight. I understand that there may be concerns, and those, of course, there's no decision point here tonight other than to explore. But I do think with a year left in our term and not knowing what comes next, committing to some of these neighborhoods that have taken their fair share, have often done so with concerns but enthusiasm, knowing that we all need to do our part, that we can move towards an act of good faith around proactive planning that will see that distributed model more fully realized in Nanaimo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Armstrong, then Councillor Hemmons, then Councillor Marmon.
I'm just wondering if this is in also on top of the 10 that they've already identified back in 2018 and 2019. Is this additional, or you want different ones from what have already been identified?
I think there would just need to be, obviously, previous lists would need to be, previous lists could help inform what an updated list might look like, but I would leave that with staff to bring back to council.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm happy to support this motion. I think citing permanent supportive housing units or builds, it's a challenging process, and the more work we can kind of preload in understanding what is possible and what's out there will, as Councillor Brown says, move us from a reactionary state into a prepared place. And I think that's going to be crucial as we're going to be fighting for BC housing dollars going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I'm very supportive of supportive housing and or rent-to-income housing. In a nutshell, to wrap it all up, is my understanding correct that you're wanting to be proactive? This might be something that's already been identified by staff, because they do look at locations all throughout Nanaimo. So it might be just going back to the drawing board and taking a look and saying, here's the 2 best sites that we've identified, or are you asking for more work?
Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I think staff are, as any real estate, as they develop the real estate strategies and take into different accounts, obviously have probably a rolling idea of available properties, but things do change through time. So to Councillor Armstrong's question, I think applies here too, is that undoubtedly past staff have probably done this exercise numerous times, especially when it comes to BC housing. And so those lists will undoubtedly influence anything, if this motion passes, that they bring forward. But I think obviously, things do change on the ground. Things might be available that weren't previously, or vice versa, and there would be an update there. And I know Mr. Corson and his team are pretty good at identifying properties for a variety of initiatives and would be able to bring them forward with potential funding sources for council to consider and make a decision point that's informed by a fully fleshed out staff report.
Thank you. I note, as Councillor Brown has already commented, this is not a decision point tonight. This is simply asking that we support, we ask staff to identify 2 sites. So I'm going to vote in favor of this motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any contrary? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you very much. Councillors Armstrong and Brown, I understand you're withdrawing your motion about bicycle storage facilities, correct? Okay, thank you very much. And then Councillors Armstrong and Brown, motion read Chase River and Cinnabar Valley Mobility Plan. So moved, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion on this? Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Brown.
Yeah, this is something that I think is really important. We've heard a lot from Chase River area, especially at Extension. I've met with, I don't know how many times I've met with different neighborhood groups and the schools and everybody to deal with this. And I think we have to bite the bullet and start really putting a plan in there. I know it's going to be extremely expensive, but just in the last 5 years alone, there's been over 82 accidents, some including fatals and very serious injury accidents. It's probably one of our worst injury accident area, and we've done nothing to try and fix it. And I know it's going to be very challenging for the engineer department. I know there's a lot of work around there, but I do think it's something that from my perspective needs to be pushed up the agenda. So, and it's, I just think it's really important that we do something out in that area because I don't think they've seen a lot of municipal dollars out there at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brown.
Echo Councillor Armstrong's comments, and I will say undoubtedly this is a challenging problem, whether sandstone proceeds or not. I think there's an opinion in the community that sandstone will solve this issue. I don't share that belief to the degree that I think that is out there, just with respect to the type of development plans that have been seen to date. Those on the other side of the highway are, while they may have some potential to contribute to improving some of the access issues if sandstone did proceed in some fashion on the western side of the highway. With a highway like that, if you're not putting in overpasses and on and off ramps, it's essentially a dividing barrier. Just want to highlight that this is really, I know Councillor Armstrong has been engaging with the community a lot out there and has been pushing for a GPC on this topic and getting the community here. I think council needs to have an idea of what a planning exercise might look like if to have an outcome, a potential outcome for that GPC. So this is just essentially, the motion reads that a scope of work to what would it look like to do a planning exercise, and ideally that would come to the GPC at the same time as that discussion with the community, because then we can talk about something rather than just hearing the concerns of the community. It's not to say let's go out and fund this and plan it immediately. And I will also note that when it comes to things like mobility plans and items like that, there is already a lot of good work that's being done, especially at the regional district with the transit redevelopment strategy, that could really inform this discussion in any future planning exercises as well. Obviously, there's a very congested area or a bottleneck when it comes to automobile traffic. I don't think buses or bike lanes or anything like that is going to solve the issue, but it is all important factors in if we were to look at this area more cohesively. And I think the timing is right because staff have sort of been floating options around the Reimagine Nanaimo process and seeking council's guidance. And maybe if we had a bit more information, we could be incorporating that feedback and potential outcomes to give staff the tools that they need and might not currently have to explore other options that haven't existed to date, to be able to better respond to the community concerns that are being brought forward. and as well have a meaningful discussion on this, as indicated, I said before, on this that could be outcome focused rather than just us all talking about it and then nothing emerging from that. So that's what I think the heart of this motion is, and it's a long-standing issue with no easy solution, but it does need to be addressed at some point. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rudolph.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is really a point of clarification, and maybe Mr. Sims can provide some comments, but it may be that we're looking at a two-step process. One is to, just in my mind anyway, have a session which could be arranged fairly shortly to unpack the status of the transportation initiatives in the area, the application by Sandstone, for example, the status of various things, and then from that shape the discussion a little bit. So you could fast track the conversation a little bit if you did it that way, but I'll turn it to Mr. Sims for any comments.
Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Your Worship, Mr. Rudolph. Exactly that. I think, staff has been working in this area, as you're aware, Council. We've worked with the Neighborhood Association, we've worked with Ministry of Transportation, and there's a lot of suggestions out there. There's a lot of concern, of course. Currently, we've broken things down into operational improvements that can be done in the short, the medium, and the long term, and we've vetted that through the Chase River Neighborhood Association. So that's a positive. So it's really worthwhile for council to hear this, where things are at, and then some of the problems of which you are aware, but and the context, some of the historic, you're aware of the Cranberry Connector. We're kind of looking at that with a little bit more of a jaundiced eye now, as to its benefit, just as an example. So just to take that step back and then describe how a mobility study could look going forward, which I understand from Councillor Brown's comments that that's really the intent of this motion. So we have also the complexity of Sandstone, but regardless of Sandstone, there's still the issue, as you noted, west of the highway.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Councillors Armstrong again.
And just to clarify, so do you think the GPC would be a good place to unpack that then?
Yes.
Thank
absolutely.
you.
And Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. I'm quite familiar with Sandstone and the work that they want to do or would like to do. I remember hearing reports and staff reports on the entire area. Is what you're offering here any different? Is there stuff we're not aware of that's been happening?
I think there's some updates for council that things have moved forward with the community and with Ministry of Transportation Highways. And we have Sandstone as well. So there's these two parallel processes. Regardless of how Sandstone proceeds, if the city and ministry, it's really between the city and the road authorities, as it were, to solve some of the issues that are there, and to lay out. It's, as you can imagine, it's not an easy nor a cheap solution or series of solutions.
Yeah, and I completely understand that. I'm just wondering. I'm looking at this motion as it says the scope of the work will actually solve the problem, and not just fix little things along the way. That's why I quite like this motion as it says, because it's literally by the time we're done, that if in the event that we do go with this project and we do find the funding for it, it'll actually, okay, here's how you solve the problem, here's how much it's going to cost, here's your timeline. That's kind of what I'm looking for out of that sort of thing.
Thanks, Your Worship. I apologize that I wasn't clear. I'm thinking in the providing that background, and then the next step would be, as Mr. Rudolph indicated, a second step to what would the implications or what would a mobility study look like. So that sort of a two-part GPC in the same session. Does that make sense? Yeah. So this is
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine.
Sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing no further speakers, all those in favor of the motion? Any contrary? Seeing none, motion carries. And the last is Councillor Gesselbrock, notice of motion be zero waste circular economy strategy. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. Is my audio coming in okay?
Oh, yes.
A little too good?
No, not at all. You can never be too loud for me.
Okay, I'd like to move that the City of Nanaimo work plan include the development of a zero-waste circular economy strategy that seeks to leverage municipal powers to advance the regional goal of 90% diversion of waste from landfill by applying the framework of zero-waste hierarchy and the systems, processes of circular economy that eliminate waste and pollution, keep materials in circulation, and regenerate natural systems, and includes investigating initiatives to improve access to recycling services and amenities, eliminates unnecessary single-use items, implements deconstruction and sustainable demolition regulations, and supports circular business entrepreneurship.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Bonner. Councillor Gesselbrock, you wish to speak to it?
I just, from the briefing note I submitted, I hope folks had a chance to read it, but there's ample opportunity to improve waste reduction and diversion in Nanaimo. According to the Regional District Solid Waste Audit, over 50% of materials still being landfilled are easily reusable, recyclable, or compostable. A large portion of these materials coming from the institutional, commercial, industrial sector. Building materials make up over 11% of materials being disposed, and the waste from construction, demolition, and renovations is in great need of being addressed. Plastics still make up a large portion of the waste stream. There are many barriers to accessing recycling for materials, especially for multifamily residences, and more options for textiles, reuse, and recycling need to be developed. Zero waste and circular economy are two mutually supporting frameworks that guide solid waste planning and to a certain extent are beginning to inform economic development. Zero waste sets out an aspirational goal and provides a hierarchy of preferred policy interventions. The circular economy builds on these concepts and defines systems and processes needed to eliminate waste and pollution, keep materials in use, and regenerate natural systems. Although solid waste management is a primary responsibility of the regional district, the city of Nanaimo is uniquely positioned to enhance regional waste reduction and circular economy development initiatives due to additional regulatory powers granted to municipalities. These additional powers and authorities include zoning, permitting, business regulation, and nuisance regulation. An example of these municipal powers are municipalities' shared authority with the provincial government to regulate the use of materials that have direct impact on the environment. This is what power we exercise in our single-use checkout bag bylaw that bans single-use plastic bags. In our current OCP, the city of Nanaimo commits to the objective of supporting regional goal of zero waste and minimizing the amount of waste that must be landfilled. In support of the regional district goal of 90% diversion by 2029, the city has set a parallel goal of over 50% reduction of our current waste from just over 350 kilograms per capita to 150 per capita by 2030. So recent initiatives that reflect the city's commitment to zero waste and circular economy are the move to automated collection services for the separation of material streams, single-use checkout bag regulation, as I mentioned, the reuse rendezvous and Nanaimo recycled trunk sales, inclusion of a zero waste as criteria in the sustainable procurement policy, zero waste public education, and the inclusion of circular economy as a principle in the city's recent economic development strategy. The City of Nanaimo Department of Sanitation also has a zero waste coordinator to support initiatives, and it's hoped that the new manager of sustainability will also provide additional resourcing. In addition, the City of Nanaimo, in partnership with the Regional District of Nanaimo, has recently begun participating in the Circular Cities and Regions Initiative, which is an FCM project to provide local government with the knowledge and tools to accelerate circular economy solutions. Despite the focus on zero waste and several initiatives and the growing usage of circular economy language, the City of Nanaimo does not have a formal strategy to identify and prioritize zero waste and circular economy initiatives. Many municipalities are implementing zero waste and circular economy initiatives, with several developing full strategies. The municipality of Victoria is one that's developing a strategy which is of comparable scale and jurisdiction to Nanaimo. Several initiatives that have been identified as useful components of a potential strategy are developing requirements, guidelines for source separation and diversion from events, improving public realm source separation infrastructure, introducing requirements for waste plans through business licensing, regulating construction, renovation, and demolition waste through construction permitting and deconstruction bylaws, developing and enforcing building standards and codes to support end-of-life material recovery from urban development, allocating space resources for reuse and sharing programs, regulating the use of single-use products, financing incentives to support local innovation, developing building standards that facilitate material reuse and recovery, and instituting development standards for space requirements for recycling, composting, and landfill waste bins. There are many options for a strategy. Some of these initiatives, programs, the City of Nanaimo has already commenced, and others could be potentially pursued, leveraging the work that's already been accomplished in other municipalities. Given the city's current participation in the Circular Cities Initiative, the strong community interest, existing commitment to waste reduction, and the current updating of the official community plan, this upcoming year is an excellent moment in time for the city to develop a zero waste and circular economy strategy so that we can strategically enhance our efforts in waste reduction and economic development. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gesselbrock. Any further speakers on the motion? Seeing none, I'm going to support this, although I must say I'm not entirely clear what staff will be expected to provide that will actually, and I don't mean to be critical, but will provide some meaningful actions that council can pursue in due course that will achieve the goals. But certainly we're asking staff to develop a strategy, so I'm on board. Councillor Bonner, I've inspired you, have I? Or you just want to move?
Well, I've already seconded it, I think.
Sorry?
I just wanted to speak on it a little bit. I won't go to the... You did that on purpose. I won't go to quite the length that Councillor Gesselbrock, who just recycled the 40% of the English language there.
Thank God.
But I would like to say this is something that we're going to have to do anyway, right? Eventually, we're going to have to be doing this. And so why not start now? And the hurt will be less than having to wait a long time and then just having to do the whole thing all at once. So I'm quite in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All those in favor, seeing no further speakers. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. I suspect, Ms. Gurry, I didn't see any strangers, so to speak, in the gallery, and there'll be nothing for question period. And who would care to make the motion for adjournment? Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor, thank you very much. Appreciate this, council. I would remind you to be back here in 12 hours for finance and audit. Well done. Thank you.